would you say that a person is racist back in the 1960s if they didn't support Martin Luther King's civil rights movement?
It would depend on why, is what I would say. If they thought he was a serial cheater and they're like, I can't get behind that guy because I'm a Christian and that's like the worst thing one can do, even though I support Malcolm X or something, like it would depend on the reasoning behind it.
Sure. Well, let's say then, like, support the movement then.
It would depend on what the movement meant. I think this is one of the issues with BLM is you support the movement, right? It's like, well, what do you mean when you say support the movement? So I don't know a ton about what the issues were back in the day, but I could conceive of a world where someone would not support the movement, think they were doing it. I mean, like, didn't Malcolm X not support the way that he was doing it?
Well, like Malcolm X was a part of the movement. He just didn't like the fact that Martin Luther King tried to kowtow so much. But Malcolm X changed his mind down the line. He became less separationist.
I guess the point is that it's conceivable. It's conceivable that somebody would not support that movement and not be racist.
I think Malcolm X
was not
racist, even if he didn't like the movement.
Yeah, like there are ways to not support the movement because you have specific concerns with its underlying motivations or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I mean, like a person who just doesn't support it, not because of like the tactical concerns, but a person who just, like, you ask them, hey, how do you feel about MLK and the civil rights? And they're like, nah. Like
it would depend why. I would have to ask further questions. That would be my answer.
Right, but the subsequent question would be, what reason is good enough that you think it's okay to deny Black people first-class citizenship because of your pet reason?
Well, they would say, for instance, and again, I think there's a lot of implicit demeaning undercutting your pet reason. Like maybe to them, their reason, let's just pretend that this person is they're a Bible preaching Catholic, and they think that the judgment day is coming. And if there's a preacher who cheats on his wife, that the world will not be saved. So in getting behind Martin Luther King and increasing his ability to cheat on his wife, despite the fact that he's a holy man, is going to condemn all of society to burn in hellfire. I would find that to be, for them, incorrect, because I'm not religious, but a sufficient reason that would not make me categorize them as racist, just wrong about Christianity.
But then wouldn't that mean that it's impossible for any cultist or any conspiracy theorist to be racist or sexist or anything?
No,
because they would always have a way of justifying.
What if they just said they don't like Black people? Then they'd be racist.
I really have to hit on this, okay? I really have to hit on this because historically, most racists, even back during the slave days, wouldn't say that they supported slavery because they didn't like Black people.
Sure.
A lot of people back during the slave days supported slavery because they thought it was the natural order of the world.
Yep.
There's nothing implicitly racist about believing in a natural order of the world. Mm-hmm. But if it leads to you supporting slavery from, like, not even just from a consequential perspective, just from like a pragmatic perspective, I think it's okay to refer to that person as racist.
Sure.
If a person is anti-civil rights movement because they have some like specific personal issue that isn't in line with the way that movement runs, what they're essentially saying is that whatever their opinions on like racial equality, they're not important enough to them that those would take priority over their personal issue. And to me, that would a racist make.
Or they might think that it could have the opposite of the consequence. They might think that particular movement is going to set them back 20 years and that there's a different, like.
Sure, but that would be like a strategic concern rather than like a problem with the aims of the movement itself.
So this is why I think, and I'm glad we're doing this, longer questions than do you support X are very important, or longer answers are very important. So you'd said something that I wanted to go back to. Yes, let me tell you where I think that your intuition is dead on, is that you can't take people at their word. I think that's what you're saying. It's like, look, if you say you're not racist, but you go out every day and you whip your slaves 50 times, and then you go into dinner and you pray to God and say all men are created equal, like at some point, consequentialism needs to step in and say, I don't give a damn what you profess. We have to look at the consequences of your actions. But I do think we cannot throw out entirely that. So what I'm looking for in someone's worldview, let me go back to that, the person who didn't support MLK for religious reasons. If I find that they are like Westboro Baptist level committed in every facet of their life, and they don't eat shellfish or mix meat with milk, and they're like Bible literalists, I go, you know what? I don't know that they're racist. I think that they're wrongly Christian. But if I find them selectively enforcing their Christian beliefs and, I don't support this because of Christianity, but they're cheating on every other aspect of the Bible, then I go, I think that's probably, and I'm intuiting what's going on in their brain imperfectly.
But what about modern day neo-Nazis?
Mm-hmm.
The modern neo-Nazi line is that what's happening right now in the West is something called white replacement,
Mm-hmm.
the white genocide, where all of us, we're all white. I assume you both look pretty white. We're us folk, we're getting bred out because the Jews are using selective positions of power in media, finance, and in politics to bring in more immigrants, brown, dark-skinned immigrants, and to promote more miscegenation in media, thus leading more white women to have sex with black men. Therefore, we get bred out, we become a minority, and the Jews' long civilizational war against the, what do they call us? What's the Jew term for not Jew? Gentile, thank you, against the Gentiles to be completed. Now, if you believe all of that, if you genuinely believe that the Jews are collectively working to destroy the white race.
We are.
I've been to the meetings.
I got bar mitzvah. I'll tell you.
If you believe all of that, the follow-up points, we need to commit to the extermination of the Jewish people to defend ourselves, or we need a separate white ethno-state with no other ethnic groups so that we can practice our culture and marry in peace, actually follow fairly naturally.
Yes.
If you believe you're the product of a deliberate targeted genocide by like a conspiratorial group of ultra powerful Jews, those consequences necessarily follow. But that's the thing though, right? If you made a consequential argument with one of these neo-Nazi types and you were to say, well, I don't actually think you're racist or anti-Semitic because your beliefs necessarily follow from the things you believe, I feel like we lose our rhetorical ability to address the existence of racism at all. And eventually we have to say, you know what? I don't care about intent. I don't care about justification. I don't care about what comes out of your mouth. The only thing I care about is you want a white ethno-state. You want to genocide the Jews. Let's get to it. Okay. Let's talk about this.
Sure.
And that's a very hardline example. I'm talking about neo-Nazis, though I've argued with a lot of people who believe the thing that I just described. But for a lot of Republicans, the underlying logic is pretty identical. For example, Donald Trump fearmongered all across 2020 about Black Lives Matter invading the suburbs, which is like a reflection of old language about the racialized inner city and the white suburbs. Nowadays, of course, the suburbs are more racially integrated, but it was so blatant that Biden called him out on it in one of the presidential debates. Donald Trump didn't even retort. It's an obvious dog whistle. And if one of the key selling points for your presidency is you reiterating the belief that the black hordes will invade the white civilized parts of your country, we've moved to a point now where, like, regardless of what pre-existing beliefs have led you to think this necessary, we're dealing with old and powerful race war rhetoric. And if we can't call people who stand by that racist, I don't know if there's much of a meaning to the term. And at that point, I am reduced exclusively to discussing outcomes of policies without any mention of the moral worth of supporting or opposing any of those policies. And while that isn't a bad way to discuss policy, if I were a politician, I would never use a term like racist, for example. I would only ever talk about the outcomes of policy. As somebody who tries to argue online and talk to people online, removing that type of condemnation from my vocabulary in such obvious instances of its use is difficult, and I feel it's rhetorically damaging.
Yeah.
While I can be called a socialist, communist, fascist, transphobe, whatever, you can say anything about me, and often my critics do.
But you think,
if I can't call supporters of that a racist, I don't know. Like, what does the word mean then?
So there's a lot here. So I'm going to try to take it.
I did say a lot. I apologize.
I'll try to take it in pieces. So that QAnon guy who believes that the Jews have it, I would say, if when disabused of his belief that the Jews had the conspiracy, he immediately released the need to cleanse the ethno-state, I would not actually call that person a racist. I would, and it's trying to step into their mind, I would go, this person's trying to save the fucking world. This is a goddamn hero who's very confused. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what I would call that is wrong or ignorant, and or maybe right, maybe Ben knows, you know. But I think you could say, like, look, this is going to cause you to behave like a racist. You know what I mean? Like, this is gonna make you behave like people in 1800 that tried to exterminate black people, and like, is that what you're aiming at? So that this can be a semantic disagreement. Moving on to Donald Trump, I think that, again, I was not hugely involved in the election. I watched the debates to do a potential charisma breakdown on him. But your perspective of Trump having these constant dog whistles is not shared by me. And I'm not claiming that's because he didn't do it. I'm just trying to point out that where one consumes their news has a huge impact. And when I watched that debate, that moment that was apparently breezed by was a totally breezed by to me. Like, that didn't stand out in any sort of meaningful way because I wasn't watching and consuming news that told me who he was very often. And I might miss the opportunity to understand him. That's a risk that I take. I just, kind of sat this vote out. I didn't vote for the record. And then I believe, where do we close with this? With the importance of the semantic word. I guess where I come back to is that will create, that is, you will behave like a racist is where I can get without, because I do think that intent needs to be there at some level.
Yeah, I would just say so I'm not, this isn't a condemnation, but if you're at a point where you would feel uncomfortable calling a neo-Nazi a racist because there's a possibility they may disavow their conclusions if they were to be convinced the Jewish conspiracy theory isn't real, then you're operating on an entirely different wavelength than me.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe your approach would be effective in directly speaking to them. I know what you both do, after all. I'm familiar with your channel. I've watched plenty of your videos. So I know where what your angle is. And I think that's perfectly agreeable. I don't know if calling a person to a racist to their face ever has any beneficial effect ever. But at that point, as far as I'm concerned, the term racist loses any descriptive power if we can't even apply it to such people.
Sure.
Especially since, like, in my opinion, nobody who believes in the Jewish conspiracy theory has ever been moved off of it with evidence. It's usually something you arrive at post hoc after, like, other conclusions.
And in that case where there was a complete inconsistency of, like, wait a second, you got this Jewish friend and you've got all these other Jewish things. It's like, you don't actually believe that. So at some level, I definitely agree with you, where I'm trying to step into their moral framework and see, is it consistent with what they're telling me? And I think what you are rightly suspicious of are people that feed you one justification, but have a totally different unconscious set of beliefs, which very well may be, and I would be willing to take a risk in some cases to say, what you have is a kernel of racial hate in you that is finding rational explanations and all of these other things. But I know that those aren't what you really believe because you don't act as if there's a Jewish conspiracy. You only act as if you hate black people. Does that, like...
Oh, yeah. And if you could substantiate those claims in a direct conversation, I think that'd be a blowout, by the way. I absolutely think that would. And this is the last thing I'm going to say on this, by the way, because because it can get circular. And honestly, subjects like this are deserving of a very well invested conversation. But for me, one of my biggest worries is that we've given a lot of people a lot of tract to be bad things without allowing them to describe themselves as such. The internet is full of people who will call themselves moderates or centrists, but who I see repeating language I could see on Stormfront. The internet is full of people like that because, rightly so, a lot of conservatives have realized that if you call yourself a neo-Nazi or a white nationalist or whatever, people will instantly disregard what you have to say. So if you say you're a moderate centrist who's disillusioned with BLM after you got treated poorly at a protest for being white, and since then you simply think we need to curtail on a couple of immigration policies, people will listen to you and people will subscribe to you. And I just don't like it when we aren't willing to give name to phenomena which are really common to the human experience. A lot of people treat racism like it's this magical ethical deformity. 40 years ago, the majority of the American population didn't think black and white people should vote. Most of the people who voted in that poll are still alive. This is not like an invisible phenomena. It's just a fact of the world. Misogyny and racism, not just from white people or men or whatever, just from all of us. These biases are really omnipresent. And I want to destigmatize their invocation to an extent. I don't mean it as a great moral denunciation. I'm willing to admit, for example, that I have racial animus within me. I would be comfortable with somebody saying that I am in part racist because we are all raised in a society which imparts on us certain biases. I live in a white supremacist society. I'm going to adopt some of that. It's in my head. You just got to be aware of it. Try not to go crazy with it, To me, it's not this great moral condemnation. And I think if we could all address it that way, I think it'd be easier to weed it out.
So listen, I'm Jewish. I'm going to tell you, I'm sure a lot of neo-Nazis are racist. Okay. If you look at my voting history, it skews Democrat. So it'd be weird to call me a Republican, given that that's not where most of my voting goes. But I just think that to say that a Venezuelan person who moved here and decided to vote Republican because they have experienced socialism meaning the death of a country and going, I know why you voted for a Republican. You're racist. And then they tell you, no, that's not the case. Actually, if you look at my history, you'll literally never find an action that looks motivated by racism. But here's why I voted for it. It's because I think socialism is dangerous. And then you go, no, it's because you're racist. That just seems very strange to me. It seems like
it could be both.
We have to accept that there are Republican voters motivated by things other than racism.
Well, I didn't just say racist. I said, whoa, hold on. I think I'm being mischaracterized here. I've never said the only reason a person would vote Republican is racism. Just that if you vote Republican, you are at the very least okay with racism.
Okay, no.
You can have other motivations, but then you would be saying like, yeah, I think that I voted Republican to stop the advent of socialism in the United States. Okay. And I'm okay with racism as long as we also achieve that goal of mine, you know?
What about if I say, and I don't think that the person that I voted for Senate has racist policies just because they have an R next to their name?
Well, then there would be one of the people who could support Mitch McConnell's like majority in the Senate, which means that they would continue to have a stranglehold over the ability for progressives to pass racial legislation in the country.
Maybe
Eventually it all boils down to the same power structure.
Maybe they think that the progressive racial legislation won't
work.
Good,
won't
isn't
work.
going to solve racism. Has misunderstood what racism is.
Let's not keep on this one. I think what Ben is trying to say is that there, and we're not going to get to an agreement, that there are reasons that someone could be completely not racist and vote Republican, and that could include not believing that progressive agendas to end racism that they say will end racism, that they think it will make it worse, for instance, and you don't see
like they think defund the police would be a bad idea,
or something like that. Sure,
yeah, that they think any.
Whatever it is, whatever the Green New Deal, I don't know. I'm not super big on policy.
Right. I mean,
let's just say they've looked into
we have to get specific, of course.
Whoever it is they vote for, that they just vote because they watched the news 3 or 4 times and they tuned into one debate and didn't notice any racism in Donald Trump and then voted for Donald Trump.
Sure. Well, if we're talking about people who vote off of such ignorance, they aren't even aware of what's going on, it'd be difficult for me to say that they have some kind of racial bias, if for no other reason than because they're barely even political actors. They might as well have flipped a coin.
Well, what
and
if they
decided
think
who to vote
defunding
on.
the police is worse for Black Americans than overfunding the police with better training?
That's fine. I mean, Biden has advocated for funding the police more, so they should vote for Biden then.
Well, no, but this is what I'm saying. Like someone could have a perception of a policy that is racist, and someone could look at the exact same policy and think it's not racist.
Well, we would have to look at the actual outcomes of the policy now.
Well, this is again where we disagree. Well, again, it's tough. One, we
could go in this circle forever.
We're going to loop-de-loop. We're going to loop-de-loop here.
But I think the outcomes. So the outcomes of the
are unclear, and that person may or may not be a consequentialist. And
I think that despite the fact that the NBA has more than 13% Black people, it is a meritocracy. I don't think that it is a system based on racial bias in scouting. So when I look at the outcomes of the NBA demographics and they don't match the demographics of the general population of the US, I don't immediately assume that it's built on a racist system.
Sure,
and
but
I think that's the difference.
No, and he's saying that person would take that logic to the United States of America, and you would disagree historically, but there are premises upon which they would disagree.
Well, but here's the thing. Like if somebody's making the argument that the reason why there are so many more Black people in prison is because they're more predisposed to committing crime, eventually we're just running back to 18th century phrenology, tropes about racial differences. Sure. A lot of people in America do believe that, actually. I'd actually be willing to bet that like probably around a quarter or a third of Americans do believe that, even ones that wouldn't admit it, because the underlying sociological arguments for why Black people are in prison are super complicated. I actually don't blame people for not really being familiar with the totality of the information there, because that's an entire field of study. Criminology is you can get degrees in this stuff. But there are still arguments to be made about it, no? And if a person actually did believe that Black people were genetically predisposed to commit crime, I think that would be a pretty racist belief, no?
Well, again, it depends on the world that we live in. And I mean this having not looked into it or not having an opinion on this, but let's say that we live in a world where that was the case and it came through. I'm not saying we do. That would then not be racist. What racism is in my definition, and I will try to explain clearly what I mean, is it's the invocation of race in a place where it does not belong. So where a place where it might belong is like if you're hiring for an aid worker in a violent area of Africa, and you're like, look, no white people, because if you're white, you're more likely to get injured and die. Like that to me would not be racist in any sort of negative connotation. I don't think asking the question, are there differences between races, makes one racist. You know,
what if you believe those differences mean black people are more inherently violent, and you use that as a police officer to motivate what types of people you stop?
Okay, again, it would depend on the reality of the world that we live in.
See, but this is my issue, though. All racism has lost any rhetorical meaning at this point because you're relying on factors which you could only ascertain through like a deep psychiatric analysis of every individual. Okay, well, then that to me is utterly irrelevant. I don't care about intent. If you're a police officer and you're locking up more black folk because you mistakenly believe they're more genetically predisposed to crime, the world is made better if that is treated as racist.
Got it.
If we wait hand and foot on like the individual explanation for every of the millions of actors that participate in the systems we live in, we can't actually bring about systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
It was, after all, in the model of the abolitionists that Martin Luther King marched, and it was in the model of his marches now that BLM marches. But those models, the abolitionists and the civil rights activists, they did not rely on the model you used. They knew they lived in a racist system, and they called it out for what it was, even though that system is merely a mesh of millions of actors who may or may not have had individual racial biases. At the end of the day, the ability to call all of it racist is necessary to challenge it.
I understand what you're saying. So and again, where I would disagree, and there'd be areas, by the way, with all of this where I concede. Like if I interact with the cop and he's got these, to me, brain dead reasons for believing like, well, I saw one time and this guy did X, Y. I was like, that doesn't jive to me to be a cohesive worldview with anything other than hate of a different skin color at its core. But again, that's me. I would be slow to call a lot of different names, not just racist. I would be slow to say a lot of things. And I understand your point that we want to wrap it in. Where I would caution, where Ben is cautioning, is saying all of it. And where I think the line that we don't need to get to is somewhere less than all Republican voters and somewhere more than I need to do a deep psychiatric evaluation of every person in order to use the word.
Do I think that some police are racist? Yes. Do I think that some Republicans are racist? Yes. Do I think that some Democrats are racist? Yes. Do I think that all Republicans and all police and all Democrats are racist? No. Well, not by my definition of racism.
Can we move on from it to a different point? Is that okay with you, or do you want the last word?
No. I appreciate your perspectives. We discussed it extensively, and I'm glad. I don't often get conversations like these, especially not with Republicans. I don't know. I guess for me, like when General Attorney Barr is considering sedition charges for Black Lives Matter protesters, like I just have to wonder, like the people who voted Trump in, the people who got in the president who was able to appoint General Barr. Well, now he's been let go, but the people who brought us to that threshold. I mean, it's the matter of motivation. I don't know. And if you're talking about consequential outcomes as well, I mean, it could well be the case that many of them genuinely have no racial animus and don't even know. They don't even know what it is they're supporting.
Sure.
Most voters in the United States genuinely have no idea what it is they're doing. But like at the end of the day, after World War II ended, we didn't only march the extra bad German citizens to the theaters to show them pictures of the concentration camps. We marched all of them. So,
but we didn't put them all to death.
Yeah. No.
We didn't put them all to death.
Yes, there was different degrees.
We graded.
No, we didn't. Well, but I don't want to put every Republican to death. What I want from most Republicans, even the ones that I've called racist, which solve them, I just want to talk with them. I think most of them are kind, good-hearted people. I think that understanding the totality of the way our system works and how it disadvantages certain people is literally like a collegiate exercise. I would never be I can't be like. It would be silly of me to expect everybody to get behind this, not just Democrats, or not just Republicans, but Democrats too. I just want to talk with folks, but I will be honest about my convictions if asked about them, especially when I'm not in the context of having a conversation with them.
No, for sure,
with one of them directly.
And I think you should. I think you should always be honest. I think to the extent that you can, if you were able to reflect and get to the point where you honestly didn't think that all Republicans were racist, I think it would help you with your progressive agenda. But if you can't get there, I don't think you should lie. So yeah, my only thing I guess would be to at some point meditate on it and see if you can get to that honestly, because I do think it would be to your I think funny enough, I think it would be to your advantage.
But again, that's not an argument for truth. No, that's an argument for
it's an argument to reflect on it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't get there, then so be it.
Do you believe it could actually be preferable to adopt my perspective on the matter when we're talking about broad social arguments, broad civilizational distinctions?
Oh yeah, I come to the same place as you, which is that I feel truth is my first has to be what I'm beholden to. So the reason I don't think all Republicans are racist isn't because I think it's a good belief. It's just what I think is true.
Okay.
So I
And
actually have the
ultimately-
same. Yeah.
That ultimately we all walk in the same direction. I think that's what matters most to me. This is something that I've found with a lot of Republicans as well, because like I'm a socialist. There aren't many socialists in America, and that's fine, whatever. It hurts me personally, but I try not to take it. I try not to take it to the heart. And what matters most to me is that we're all sort of pushing in the same direction on these difficult questions that we're never going to find hard answers to, as long as we're moving together.
Yeah.
And I think that we are on this. I think that most Republicans are as well, because a lot of them just want good education for their kids. They want good health care so they don't fucking die at 65. We're all moving in the same general direction. And everything between here and the destination is an opportunity to further refine the arguments we'll necessarily have when we eventually arrive at those disagreements.
Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.